Welcome to the 8A Stars 3 Listen and Learn. This is our second session, and it is being recorded on February 28th, 2023. My name is Herman Lyons, and I'm a member of the 8A Stars 3 team. Joining me for today's Listen and Learn session is Aaron O'Brien, Director of the 8A Stars 3 GWAC at Broadleaf Incorporated. As with all Listen and Learn participants, Broadleaf Incorporated is an 8A Stars 3 industry partner who has received task order awards against their 8A Stars 3 GWAC. Aaron, thanks for participating in this Listen and Learn session. Would you mind just telling us a little bit about Broadleaf and the role that you play within the organization?
Hey, Herman. Thanks so much for having me today. I'm Aaron O'Brien. I run the 8A Stars 3 vehicle at Broadleaf. We're a native Hawaiian organization-owned 8A, which means we fall into that super 8A category, as some people would call it. Founded in 2009, we received our 8A status in 2016. Currently, we have about 90 active contracts and task orders, primarily DoD, but we've also recently added several federal civilian clients, actually, thanks to Stars 3. Our work falls into two main capability areas. So the first is information technology. So things like software development, network engineering, cybersecurity, O&M, cloud migration, and then other general IT support services. And then the second is professional services, which includes acquisition support, program management, training development, public affairs, strategic communications, and then again, other professional services as they arise. We hold CMMI level 3 certifications for services and dev, and also several ISO certifications, and we have a DCAA approved accounting system. We also have several other GWACs, including OASIS, HCATS, GSA Math, Seaport, and EFAST. I myself have been working with 8As of all different sizes for about 15 years now. So this is actually my second iteration of the STARS GWAC that I have supported. So I think that I've picked up some good tips and tricks along the way, and I'm pretty excited to share them with everyone today.
Awesome. Thanks, Aaron. So to the Listen and Learn participants, Aaron and I, we recently attended a small business conference, and I thought that it would be appropriate to begin our discussion focused on conferences and events. As we move beyond the pandemic, there's going to be ample opportunities to attend more in-person events and conferences. So, Aaron, can you tell me how Broadleaf decides what events that your organization would like to attend?
Sure. Well, I want to start off by saying that Broadleaf, we are kind of on that larger end of the 8A small business category. So I'm going to speak to what Broadleaf does, but I also want to focus on how I would approach it if I was a small, because I know that that's kind of a different approach. So for Broadleaf, at the beginning of the year, we kind of create a list that we have that's ongoing from the year before of all of the conferences that we know of and that we typically attend, and then kind of mix into that some that we haven't attended yet that we kind of would like to explore for whatever year we're entering into. And we allow our business development team to go into that spreadsheet and sign up to go to different conferences. And that kind of allows us to tie those conferences back to our pipeline. So if I'm a BD person working under STARS, I have the opportunity to say, hey, there are going to be a lot of small businesses there. There are going to be a lot of companies that might be good partners for us under an IT focused GWAC. There are going to be a lot of STARS incumbents there. So I can sign up for that. And then after the conference, we look at it and kind of decide if it makes sense for us to go back to it, if the ROI was there for the organization. As a smaller company, I think, you may not have the budget there to be, traveling all over the country. And that's totally okay. I think if you're sitting in that situation, it makes sense to look at, networking events, conferences, industry days that are in your backyard and start there. It gives you an opportunity to really connect with local partners that you can work with in the future and local customers. And you can kind of talk to them there to find out, hey, what events do you attend? What professional organizations are you in, and how valuable have they been for you?
Thanks. I really like what you said about, smaller and local events. And, I suspect that, the closer you stay to home, the more time that you have to practice and polish your strategy and your preparation before going to a national event that may cost thousands of dollars. So I'd like to ask a bit about preparation and maybe strategy to help maximize your time at an event. Can you talk a little bit about that, Aaron, just to make sure you get the most out of the event?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the kind of event that you're attending. You just mentioned those like national large conferences, and there are also kind of like smaller networking events like luncheons and things that we were talking about. And then you have what I would kind of categorize as an educational event or an industry day. But ultimately, for me, I think whether I'm attending an event to learn or to network, or a specific agency industry day where I want to know, hey, what do you guys have coming up in the next, 12 to 24 months? Or even, hey, I'm very specifically looking at this one opportunity and you guys are having an industry day for that. I think at the end of the day, like, going to an event to me is about kind of meeting and learning. So if it's a networking event, I am meeting new people and learning from them. If it's an educational event, I'm getting to sit down and hear from our clients or from other experts in industry, and also getting to kind of connect with all the attendees there. And then if it's an industry day, there's an opportunity there to meet new connections that maybe are also interested in the same client or the same opportunity that you are. So for me, it's really all about like leaning in, meeting new people, putting yourself out there, and taking those as opportunities to learn. And I think make sure that you bring your business cards, because the follow-up to all of these events is super important.
Okay. And that kind of led you got in front of me a little bit, and I'm glad that you did. I don't have to read this long question that I had written down. But so generally speaking, it sounds to me like you have objectives when attending an event, and I'm not going to ask you the question because you just mentioned them, but learning, I think, is very important, right? They offer COPs, CEUs, and being able to learn from government leaders, both, locally and nationally, is really an awesome thing. But also little things like just meeting new people, right? I think there's some value in leaving a conference and having established relationships with maybe 7 or 8 people who are aligned with what you do. And so I'm just happy to hear you mention that, hey,
Yeah.
the goal of going to a conference is probably not going to be to walk away with business, right? But the
Yes.
opportunity to engage, to learn, to establish relationships, with the opportunity to perhaps get business down the road, is extremely valuable. Did I get that right, Aaron?
Yeah, and I think that I really like that you touched on, hey, you may not leave with an exact opportunity that is going to result in ABC dollars and you invested ABC into it, because I think in our industry that's very hard to quantify, and it's very hard to put a dollar value on a relationship or an interaction. I've been working with 8A companies for going on 15 years now, and I may have met someone 15 years ago that I check in with, twice a year. I see at these conferences that I attend, regularly, and we have developed a relationship over time. And one of them may bring an opportunity to me now, even though, we've been kind of, working together going on 15 years now. So I think that is difficult to really quantify, because relationships can come back at any time. So for me, I really look at an opportunity or a conference or event, and evaluate it more from like the quality of interactions that I had. How many people did I meet that I really connected with on a personal level, and our companies kind of jive, and I feel like there are real opportunities to work together in the future. And I think that if you focus on that and you go into an event with that in mind, that you'll be very successful.
Thanks for that perspective, Aaron. I really appreciate it. Now let's transition a bit. That we've talked about, preparing to go to a conference and what conference is right to you. But I suspect that post-conference action is equally or even more important than pre-conference preparation. So, and I don't know if you agree or not, but that's just what I suspect. But do you have any tips for like post-conference actions, such as a follow-up plan or maybe briefing your team or anything like that?
Yeah, so something that in the last couple of years, especially with COVID and being less in person for a lot of events, but I think that this carries into the post COVID or even just like general uh, direction that government contracting has kind of gone, is that there is a lot of presence on LinkedIn. And something that I find to be very helpful is kind of during that event or even like immediately after, connecting with those people that I've met. I think it's valuable on two sides. One, it helps you to put that face to a name. You have business cards aren't as effective as, hey, I remember what this person looks like, kind of jogs your memory a little bit. And then you have the opportunity to follow up with an email and say, hey, we talked about A, B, and C, which, having notes on these discussions, either on the business card or, in a little notebook that you have, is super useful to make sure that you remember it the next week when you're following up with those people. But I think kind of taking a twofold approach is really helpful. And for me personally, when I get back from an event, my email inbox is super full. So having that LinkedIn connection as well is a way that you can ping that person and say, hey, I shot you an email. I'm sure you're busy. Like, I'd love to talk about A, B, and C that we talked about before, and kind of continue that relationship. And I think it's a really good way to stay connected with that person as well.
Yeah, it seems like an easy way, in the technology age that we're in. And
Well,
what I was
and
thinking about as you were talking
anyway.
about it is, we talk about relationships all the time within the 8A Stars 3 GWAC, and the ability to engage with people and the ability just to meet people, right? It's often a challenge with, who do I even talk to within an agency? But having the ability to sit down and do some networking, speak with someone at an event, and having the ability to connect with them on LinkedIn, like you said, engage a couple of times a year, at least those folks remember who you are. They have the opportunity to remember who you are, and you, more importantly, know who they are. So I like that perspective. Thanks,
And I
Aaron.
think it does help to gain a little bit of trust when you can see people's insights and thought process and things like that via, ongoing communication and tagging up with each other every so often, because really at the end of the day, like, you want to do business with people you know and trust, and no better way to establish that than ongoing communications and discussions.
Got it. Awesome. Well, thanks for that conference insight, Aaron. Let's transition a little bit of our conversation from conferences and events to more specifically the 8A Stars 3 GWAC. Now, I've got a two-part question for you, and it's not a long one, but it's just two parts. The first part of the question is, how many federal agencies do you market to, and how do you identify them?
Okay. So I think, again, this really depends on your scope of past performance and your current client base. But so for Broadleaf, we have a very large client base. And with that, we have the ability to market to a lot of agencies. And something that I look for is not just, hey, this is my exact client, I can only market to every client I have. It's more like, okay, so this client that I have has these requirements and capabilities. This client that's like directly next to them also has these requirements and capabilities. I could kind of take that knowledge and past performance and apply it to this other client. So with that, so I think the number maybe isn't as important as like why you are targeting those people. So I kind of have a list of things that I think are important when you're targeting a client, and that can kind of drive how many you target. So one, I like to focus on clients that have historically used the STARS GWAC, with the caveat that you may have some clients that haven't used it that are direct clients of yours. And if that's the case, I think that you can take that opportunity to educate them on the STARS GWAC. But if they're new clients, I think it's great to kind of focus on those that are already using it, know how to use it, and are comfortable with it. And then are buying the services that you offer. if you're a network engineering company, but your client that you're targeting only is buying cybersecurity right now, it's not really necessarily the right client for you to be targeting. Third is that they have small business goals that they haven't met yet. That is not a absolute requirement, but I think that it is an opportunity to educate and to be a solution for them, wherein, they can be they can be addressing their requirements without an 8A status. And now we have with STARS a best-in-class vehicle for them to also be addressing those small business goals while getting these amazing vetted companies that are just as capable of providing quality services and, have proven themselves under the vehicle as well. So then we have the last one that I kind of already mentioned, which is the degrees of separation. So if you have a client and they have a client or they have a sister agency or very similar. So for example, I'm working with CDC. I could probably target HHS because they have similar requirements and they're the agency directly above them. I think that's something to really keep in mind, especially when you have like limited resources as a small business. With that, I really just want to emphasize and stress that having a marketing plan in place will help ensure that you follow through on this strategy. So without it being written down, it's really hard to hold yourself to all the things that you need to do to be successful. So establishing which agencies you're targeting, who you need to speak with within those agencies, and who you need to team with to be successful is super important, and keeping track of those things. So again, the marketing plan, it doesn't have to be super complicated, but just without writing it down, it's so easy to kind of get distracted with other things and not do anything.
Yeah, that makes me think of, this 8A Stars 3 contract vehicle and the ability to earn sole source awards, right? It allows many industry partners to get easily distracted, right? Because oftentimes, not you, but in general, we think we can be everything to everyone, right?
Yeah.
So I couldn't agree more about the marketing plan. On the 8A Stars 2 GWAG, the predecessor, we required a marketing action plan. And as we developed 8A Stars 3, we say, things are fluid. We feel like we should give our industry partners the flexibility to not demonstrate or prove to us that they know how to market, but we'll give that to them and let them take care of it. But I couldn't agree more than having a marketing action plan that kind of keeps you on track, right? When you start to stray off a little bit, you go back to that plan and it's fluid and it kind of keeps you on track. So
believe me, we all stray. I find myself straying every so often, and then I kind of have to level set and get back to my plan because it's so easy to get distracted. And especially as a small business owner, you have so many things on your plate at any given time that if it's not written down, it's not happening, or you don't have that strategic direction that you need to be successful.
Cool. And then a couple of the things that I wrote down, I wrote down your 4 points, but there's something that you said between make sure you're engaging with people who buy the services that you provide. And you also mentioned the small business goals, but between those, you mentioned be a solution. And many federal agencies, they kind of all have problems, right? And they all have needs. And when engaging, you definitely want to be a solution to someone's problem or someone's potential problem, or who knows, maybe you have identified the problem and they don't know it. So I really like that be a solution. When you engage industry partners, think about engaging from a, hey, I'm here to help you perspective. So thanks, Aaron. I really,
it's something that I that's so funny. I tend to have this analogy, I guess you can call it, in my head of thinking about the Wile E. Coyote and the Acme Solutions. And he's constantly using this one company, right? And it's like over and over again causing him difficulties, to put it lightly. And so maybe that's because he doesn't know any other solutions that are out there. So I think understanding the landscape of your client and, hey, they're using this solution or they have these problems, and what does their budget look like? How can I work within the confines of that to offer them something that maybe is a little better or addresses those pain points that they have? Because I really think STARS is an opportunity to innovate. And I've seen a lot of that kind of where the government has a problem or is running into some pain points and they're not sure how to address it. And they just put that problem out on STARS and kind of give these really capable and knowledgeable 8As an opportunity to run that solution down for them. And being willing to go the extra mile for that client, I think goes a long way.
I love it. And I love the Wile E. Coyote analogy. It's you're spot on, right? You want to continue having the same problems from the same thing, for lack of a better term. Okay. Now I've got $1 million question for you here, and I have to ask it. I got to ask it of you because people ask it to me week in and week out. But so now that you have identified some target agencies, and I know, Aaron, just based on what the things that you said, you've got some good points of contacts and based on relationships. But any tips or anything like that on identifying and communicating with the correct person at the agency for a particular requirement? For example, maybe they need something somebody sees on the procurement forecast. Any suggestions?
Yeah, so I do. So I always start with the Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization that any agency should have. And I think, keeping in mind that they receive probably hundreds of emails a day, and how can you ensure that you're getting the most use out of their response to you? Like, they're going to respond to you, but it might take a little bit because they're busy and there are only so many of them to address all the emails and questions and calls that they're getting. But I think that the most effective way to approach them is, first, if you can get the agency forecast either from attending an industry day or finding it on the agency website, with the caveat that is not always available, but it is sometimes available. It's good to kind of approach them with like, hey, I looked at the forecast or I attended the industry day and I'm interested in ABC. By the way, we're a STARS 3 prime, and we also provide these capabilities, and would love to sit down and talk. If you don't have that forecast or haven't been able to run down specific opportunities, I think you can also kind of approach them with that, with the curiosity there to say, hey, I looked at A, B, and C location and wasn't able to find it. Would you be willing to share the forecast with me? I would really appreciate it. And then I think when I ultimately have this forecast in hand and go through it and find opportunities that you think are valuable, it's a great time to go back to the office and say, hey, I identified these opportunities. I would love to sit down and kind of talk about them further. And with that, so there's that whole side of the house. And then the other side of the house is that I use those forecasts to go to FPDS and pull historical contract data. And a lot of times, this is like my little secret sauce, though. I'm sharing it with you guys because I want to see everyone be successful, but you can go and pull the last contracting actions that were made on any given contract, and there's usually a point of contact in there. So you can reach out to them. And one thing that I really like to do is ensure that I am going to contracting or to the end client with like a very specific ask. I feel a little more comfortable going to the OSABU with like, hey, I have this general question, or I'd like you to point me in the right direction. But when I get to the client and contracting level, I want to really have a specific need or a specific ask for them. So it would be something like, hi, I submitted an RFI on STARS 30 days ago. Like, I wanted to check to do some follow up and see if you needed any more information, or if I could ask you what the acquisition strategy might be. Or something like, hey, I wanted to introduce Broadleaf. We're a STARS 3 contract holder, and we're very interested in this specific opportunity because, we bring this capability, or blah, 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 Mm-hmm. And then on the other side of the house is that communication where you're more like, hey, I saw something, a need that you had, or I saw sources saw it on stav.gov for X requirements, and I want to encourage you to consider using STARS and list all the reasons that for this specific opportunity, it makes sense for them to use the vehicle. But with that, I have a very specific trick that I like to use, which is that I always ask in my emails, if you're not the correct person to be talking to, I would really appreciate if you would be so kind as to introduce me or give me the name of that person that I should be talking to. And the reason that this is a good trick is, one, I feel like people are so helpful and like really do want to help you as long as you approach things in a way that is kind and appreciative. And the other thing is that when they give you that contact, you can turn around and say, hey, Diana recommended that I reach out to you. So I think that that gives you a lot more clout kind of with that person, and they're more willing to engage with you. So those are kind of my trick. And then ultimately, I think attending industry days and going to sam.gov and finding those point of contacts that are associated with any given requirement or contract is super helpful. So there's a lot of different ways, but I think it's kind of a hybrid approach.
Okay. Well, we got tricks and we got secret sauce, so I appreciate that, Aaron. But one thing that, as a government official, there's something that you said several times, and I've written it down, I've circled it, and it's the ask, right? I can't tell you how many emails I get during the week where there's no ask.
Yeah.
It's, hey, we're company XYZ, we do this. If you need this, let us know. Well, on the other hand, if you were to reach out to me, not you, right? But if an industry partner or vendor were to reach out to me as a government official and say, I'm this person, and hey, here's my ask. And if they do it, tactfully and, with tact and diplomacy and credibility, as a government official, I'm likely to want to help them out, right? So I really appreciate that you have an ask, right? When you reached out to the OSBUs, you're asking them a question. You're not just saying, hey, yeah.
I think part of that is preparation. Is, several years ago, I met with a small business officer, and I had flown across the country to meet with him, and I left my business cards in my suitcase, and I came and I sat down and I said, I'm so sorry I don't have my business cards. And he really pointedly said, you're not going to grow business if you don't give people an opportunity and the ability to contact you. And he even kind of went over some of my marketing materials and pointed out places where we weren't really allowing that contact to happen or continuing the interaction. And the thing that I really appreciated about that was that he gave me some tips. I went back, I addressed those tips, and I came back to him, and it really helped to build our relationship. And it was great advice and things that I tried to make sure that I pay attention to going forward. So I think having that preparation and also showing that you're willing to learn and to improve on your interactions is super important.
Excellent. So you heard it here first. Engaging with OSBUs is not just an easy task, right? You see something procurement forecast, pick up the phone, shoot an email. It's really not that easy, right? It's having an idea on what you want to get out of the conversation, what's your ask, and in a perfect scenario, what would happen. Those are the kind of things that we want the 8A Stars 3 industry partners thinking about. So, so thanks, Aaron. I do appreciate that. And we've talked about quite a few things, and we're going to wrap it up here before too long. But do you use a culmination of things such as phone calls, emails, OSBU outreach, conference mailers, things like that? Do you just use a little bit of everything in your marketing toolkit to reach out to folks?
Yeah, I do. And I think it really depends on your level of intimacy and name recognition with that particular client. So, I think that you start small and kind of build large, right? So if you haven't even met this client before, I think just kind of introduction with ask and specifics is important. And then you can kind of build on that relationship from there. For me, I think that a healthy mix of all of those, depending on, the opportunity and how even far along they are in the acquisition process is important to keep in mind.
Okay. And what's your perspective on sole sources versus competitive task orders? Any perspective on those two?
Yeah, I think that having a healthy mix of both is really important. So one thing that I have really focused on throughout my career is consistency. I think every organization has different levels of bandwidth and things that they're able to support depending on how many employees they have, depending on how many hats they're wearing at any given time. But I think establishing kind of a number for each RFI that you respond to every month, and how many competitive bids do you want to get out the door every month, and how many email campaigns do you want to do. And I don't want anyone to feel stressed out by that statement. Really what I would focus on is, hey, I would like to send out 3 RFI responses a month. I would like to do 1 competitive bid, and then quarterly I would like to kind of send out an email blast to keep in contact with partners and clients that I'm trying to target. And then make it super easy, make it very achievable, and keep track of it. So, if you've submitted 3 RFIs and you've gotten 1 sole source out of that every month for 6 months, I think that that's pretty successful. So, really figuring out what success looks like for you, keeping track of your metrics of how many of those engagements you've done, and then adjusting them when things are either not working out or you're just like overextending yourself, I think is super important. And every organization is going to have a different number for each of those items, but the important thing is kind of establishing something and then going from there.
Yeah, establishing something, right? And so much of what you just said kind of went back to our conversation, I don't know, probably been 15 minutes ago, that to have some kind of marketing or
Yes.
capture management plan, right? Something that locks you in, that's attainable, that's you can get it done, but it helps you from getting distracted. So thanks for
Exactly.
that, Erin. And then
And it can be
Mhm.
as short as a page. It doesn't have to be anything crazy, but having something written down to direct you is so important, because otherwise you're going to find yourself trying to do everything or doing nothing.
Yep. All righty. And the last question, Erin, I promise. What advice, if you had any, what advice would you give to 8A Stars 3 industry partners who they're interested in achieving success on the 8A Stars 3 GWAC?
Yeah, that is the money question, isn't it, Herb?
Yeah.
Great question. And I have kind of been asked this question a lot. So I've boiled it down to 4 things. So we've kind of talked about most of these things, but the first one is people want to work with people they know and like. So you have to show up, you have to introduce yourself. And I think that especially as a small, it's very easy to get trapped into this idea that, like, what do I have that's so different than all these other companies? And I think ultimately, if we're willing to lean in and be ourselves and, ask questions and be vulnerable and make connections, that you don't necessarily have to be different from every company, but you're there and you have a trust level. And I think that's super important. So that's my first piece of advice, is get to know people and your client and your partners, because they want to work with people they know. My second piece of advice is to work with other stars industry partners. Now, we haven't spoken about this yet, but I like to view all of the companies on stars as what I call friend-atition. We can work together and we can compete with each other, but ultimately our goal is for stars as a vehicle to be successful, because company B's success is going to promote my success, and together we can work to support our clients. And I always like to say, I don't have to prime everything. And if somebody knows a client better than I do, I would prefer to be on their team or to use their expertise to help us win a specific task order. So leaning in with your partners on the vehicle, I think, is very important and will ultimately lead to more success than you would see if you went after it alone. Third is that you need to know it keeps your clients and partners up at night. So we kind of talked about that, like, be the solution. I think that if you can really zero in on 1 to 3 things that are keeping your potential partners, your existing partners, and your clients up at night, and if you can help to find those solutions, that you will be successful. And part of that is the listening, leaning in, and understanding, because if you're not present, if you're not taking in this information, it's really hard to go and find the solution. And finally, the old adage, fail to plan, plan to fail, we have talked about numerous times already, but ultimately, if you don't have a plan, it's very hard to execute on it. And again, the plan doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but have a plan, because without it, you are going to have no direction to guide you and to hone in on what really makes you successful.
I like it. Perfect. So those of you who weren't following along, or you just got so interested in what was going on, the first one is be someone that folks know and they like and they trust. Work with other 8A Stars 3 industry partners. Be a solution like we've talked about, and plan. Plan for your success.
Mhm.
So thank you, Aaron. I appreciate that. Aaron, thanks not only for that last part, but the whole insight and helping the fellow 8A Stars 3 industry partners understand how Broadleaf approaches events and markets their 8A Stars 3 GWAC. We went in a lot of different directions today. And industry partners, I hope that you found this session useful and have identified a few things that you can incorporate into your capture management strategy. This concludes today's Listen and Learn session. Thanks again, Aaron. We appreciate your time and perspective.